The front door latched behind me with a sound that felt final, heavy, like a vault closing, or perhaps opening. I couldn't tell which yet. The night air hit my legs, exposed and electric, a sensation so sharp it made my breath hitch. I stood frozen on the welcome mat, the rough fibers pressing through the thin soles of shoes I had never worn outside before. The porch light hummed above me, casting a yellow spotlight on a version of myself that wasn't supposed to exist. The person who had just stepped out of that house wasn't the brother who lived there. That boy was dissolving, turning into mist. I knew, with a terrifying clarity, that if I walked the 10 feet to the car, the old version of me would die tonight. Before the door opened, before the night air, there was only the static. For years, that's how I experienced my own reflection. It wasn't a face I saw in the bathroom mirror. It was a frequency, a low-level white noise that blurred the edges of my jaw, my shoulders, my eyes. I would stand there, toothbrush in hand, waiting for the signal to clear, waiting to recognize the person staring back. But the picture never resolved. It was just a gray, buzzing absence where a self should have been. I moved through the house like a ghost, haunting a life that didn't belong to me. Chloe was the only interruption in the signal. My older sister. She was the only color in a world that felt aggressively beige. She moved with a fluidity I envied, a chaotic, beautiful mess of textures and scents that seemed to push back against the silence of our home. I think she saw the static on me. She never said it, not back then. But she would watch me when I didn't think I was being observed. She saw the way I hesitated before entering a room, the way I shrank away from the heavy masculine expectations that hung on the walls like hunting trophies. I remember the specific texture of the disconnect on a Tuesday evening 3 weeks ago. We were all sitting in the living room. The television was murmuring something about the economy. Mom was knitting, the needles clicking a rhythm that felt like a countdown. Dad was reading on his tablet. I sat in the corner armchair, the one with the stiff, scratchy fabric that smelled like dust and lemon polish. I felt completely untethered. Like if I didn't grip the armrests, I might just float up and through the ceiling, evaporating into the atmosphere. "You're quiet tonight," Dad said, not looking up. "Everything good with the team?" "Yeah," I said. "Fine." The word tasted like ash. I was wearing my boy mode uniform, stiff denim jeans that chafed against my skin, a heavy cotton t-shirt that felt like a lead vest. Every seam, every stitch felt wrong. It was a costume that was 2 sizes too small and made of sandpaper. I could feel the weight of the fabric enforcing a shape I didn't have, dictating a posture that made my spine ache. The roughness of the denim was a constant, abrasive reminder of the lie. I looked at my hands, resting on my knees. They looked alien. Too large, too clumsy. I wanted to peel the skin off and see if there was something softer underneath. The silence in the room grew thicker, filling my ears with that familiar white noise. I felt the panic rising in my throat, a physical tightness that made it hard to swallow. I was disappearing. The static was getting louder, drowning out the TV, drowning out the clicking needles. I needed to breathe. I needed to scream. Then the pattern broke. Chloe, who had been scrolling on her phone on the sofa, suddenly stopped. She looked up. She didn't look past me, the way people usually did when they saw the brother. She didn't look at the boy clothes or the short hair. She looked right at me. Her gaze was sharp, intelligent, and terrifyingly perceptive. She locked eyes with me, and for the first time in months, the static quieted. She saw the panic. She saw the ghost. She stood up, the movement sudden and decisive. "I'm bored," she announced, her voice cutting through the beige. She looked at me, a small, conspiratorial smile playing on her lips. "Come upstairs. I need a second opinion on something." I followed her up the stairs, my feet heavy, each step feeling like I was dragging lead weights attached to my ankles. The hallway was a transition zone, the air growing thinner, less pressurized the further we got from the living room. When we reached her door, she didn't just open it. She broke the seal on a different atmosphere. Entering Chloe's room always felt like stepping into a different ecosystem. Downstairs was all hard angles and muted tones, a museum of people who didn't talk about their feelings. But here, the air was thick and sweet, smelling intensely of vanilla body spray, burnt hair from a straightener, and the sharp chemical tang of nail polish. It was a chaotic, vibrant sanctuary. Clothes were piled on the chair in the corner like soft, colorful sculptures. The lighting was different too, warmer, filtered through a scarf she'd thrown over the lampshade, turning the room into a glowing amber cave. She closed the door behind us. Then, she engaged the lock. The click was small, but in the sudden quiet of the room, it sounded like a gunshot. It sealed us in. It sealed the world out. "Sit," she said, pointing to the edge of her bed. She didn't sit with me. She went to her vanity, picking up a bottle of foundation, turning it over in her hands, but she wasn't looking at it. She was looking at me in the mirror. "I didn't actually need a second opinion on anything," she said. Her voice was casual, but there was a tension in her shoulders that I hadn't seen before. My heart did a slow, painful somersault. "Oh, you look like you're in pain, kid," she said, turning around to face me. She leaned back against the desk, crossing her arms. "Not physical pain, but spiritual. You look like you're wearing a suit made of bees." I tried to laugh, but it came out as a dry, choking sound. "I'm fine, Chloe. Just tired." "You're not tired. You're hiding." She pushed off the desk and walked over to her closet. She didn't rummage. She moved with specific intent, as if she had already planned this moment, choreographed it in her head while we were downstairs watching the news. "I have a theory, a hypothesis, and I want to test it." "I don't want to play a game," I whispered. The static was coming back, buzzing at the base of my skull. "It's not a game," she said softly. "It's a science experiment, just data collection. If the hypothesis is wrong, we stop. We never talk about it again. We go back to the beige living room and watch the economy fall apart." She turned back to me. In her hands, she held a skirt. It wasn't anything elaborate, just a simple, flowy thing. A dark floral print, soft rayon that rippled like water when she moved. "But," she continued, her eyes locking onto mine, "if I'm right, then we fix the data." I stared at the fabric. My brain short-circuited. The brother part of me, the construct I had spent 16 years building out of duct tape and fear, screamed at me to run. It told me that this was a trap, that if I touched that fabric, the world would explode. But underneath that screaming, there was a hunger so violent it made my hands shake. "I can't," I said. The words were automatic, a defense mechanism. "Why?" Chloe asked. She didn't challenge me. She just asked, curious. "Because I'm a boy." "According to who?" She took a step closer. "The doctor who glanced at you for 2 seconds when you were born? The label on your jeans?" She held the skirt out, dangling it just within my reach. It swayed, hypnotic. "It's just polyester and cotton, kid. It doesn't have a gender. It's just soft. Unlike those canvas tarps you're wearing on your legs." The room went silent. The only sound was the blood rushing in my ears. I looked at the skirt, then up at Chloe's face. She wasn't laughing. She wasn't mocking. She looked serious, almost clinical. But her eyes were warm. She was offering me a life raft. "Just try it," she whispered. "5 minutes. If you hate it, you take it off. No harm, no foul." I looked at my hands. They were trembling. I looked at the denim covering my knees, the rough, unforgiving weave of the fabric that I had hated every single day of my life without knowing why. Then I looked at the fluid, dark material in her hands. It looked like a shadow I could rest in. I reached out. The movement felt slow, like moving through underwater currents. My fingertips brushed the fabric. It was cool to the touch, impossibly smooth, and the sensation sent a shockwave through my entire nervous system that had nothing to do with static and everything to do with waking up. I retreated to the small ensuite bathroom, clutching the fabric like it was contraband. The door clicked shut, and for a moment, I just stood there, breathing in the scent of lavender soap and humidity. The fluorescent light hummed, usually a harsh interrogator, but tonight it felt like a spotlight on a stage I hadn't yet stepped onto. Removing the boy clothes felt like peeling off a layer of dead skin. The denim jeans hit the tile floor with a heavy, defeated thud, a sound of structural failure. The t-shirt followed, a heap of gray cotton that had spent its life hiding me. I stood there, shivering slightly, not from cold, but from the sudden, terrifying lack of armor. I was just a body, a collection of angles and bones that I had spent years trying to ignore. Then I stepped into the skirt. It didn't fight me. That was the first thing I noticed. Men's clothes always felt like they were resisting, stiff seams and unyielding waistbands that demanded you fit them. This fabric was different. It was fluid. It settled around my hips with a cool, liquid weight, draping over my legs rather than caging them. It moved when I moved. I took a breath, and the waistband expanded with me. It felt conspiratorial, like it was whispering, "I've got you." I unlocked the door and stepped back into the amber glow of Chloe's room. She was waiting, holding something else. A wig. It was a cheap thing she'd bought for a Halloween party years ago, a long, dark brunette style, but in the low light, it looked like a crown. "Sit," she said again, gentler this time. I sat. She pulled the hair cap over my short, jagged cut, smoothing down the edges. Then she slid the wig into place. The sensation was immediate and overwhelming. The feeling of hair touching the back of my neck, the weight of it framing my jaw. It changed the center of gravity of my own head. Chloe reached for a brush, her movements rhythmic and soothing, taming the synthetic strands until they fell in soft curtains around my face. "Okay," she whispered, her hands resting on my shoulders for a split second before pulling away. Look, I didn't want to. I was terrified that I would look up and see a caricature, a boy playing dress-up, a joke. But the silence in the room was demanding. It pulled my eyes up to the vanity mirror. The breath left my lungs in a rush. The static was gone. For the first time in 16 years, the image in the glass resolved. I didn't see a boy. I didn't see a stranger. I saw me. The long hair softened the hard angles of my jaw. The skirt created a silhouette that made sense to my brain, balancing out shoulders that had always felt too broad. It wasn't that I looked like a supermodel, or even that I passed perfectly. It was that the internal noise, the constant, buzzing dissonance of being wrong, had suddenly cut out. It was quiet. My brain was quiet. I reached up, touching my cheek in the reflection. The hand in the mirror moved at the exact same time, and for the first time, it felt like my hand. I wasn't piloting a meat suit anymore. I was just present. I was sitting in a chair, breathing, and I existed. I started, but I didn't have the vocabulary for it. I wanted to say real. I wanted to say possible. You look like you, Chloe said. Her voice was thick, stripped of her usual sarcasm. I looked at her reflection behind mine. She wasn't laughing. There was no mockery in her eyes, no pity. There was just recognition. She was looking at me with a fierce, protective solemnity, like she had found something precious that had been lost for a long time. "Hi," she whispered. "Hi," I choked out. We stayed like that for an hour, just existing. But gravity always wins, and time always runs out. When Chloe finally checked her phone and said Mom and Dad would be home in 20 minutes, the panic returned, sharper than before. Taking the skirt off was physically painful. It felt like I was flaying myself. As the silk slid down my legs and the denim rose back up, the static returned, screaming into the vacuum where the piece had been. I scrubbed the faint trace of powder from my face until my skin was red, trying to wash away the evidence, but I couldn't wash away the memory of the silence. I put the boy costume back on, buttoned the heavy shirt, and looked in the mirror. The ghost was back. But now, I knew he was haunting a house that didn't belong to him. For the next 6 weeks, I lived in 2 different dimensions that happened to occupy the same house. My life bifurcated. There was the day self, the hollow shell dragging itself through the fluorescent hallways of high school and the silent tension of family dinners, and the night self. Chloe's room became a decompression chamber. We developed a silent, desperate language. A specific knock on her doorframe meant, "Is the coast clear?" A quick nod from her meant, "Come breathe." In those stolen hours between homework and sleep, I learned the geography of a face I was finally meeting. I learned that I didn't hate my eyes. I just hated how they looked without the sharp, defining wing of eyeliner to give them context. I learned that my shoulders, which had always felt like hulking burdens, looked elegant when framed by a boat-neck top. The static didn't exist when I was her. In that amber-lit room, I was high definition, but oxygen makes you realize just how much you were suffocating before. The boy mode wasn't just uncomfortable anymore. It was agonizing. It was a physical ache, a phantom limb pain for a body I was currently wearing. Putting on the stiff denim jeans in the morning felt like wrapping my legs in barbed wire. The heavy cotton t-shirts felt like lead aprons designed to block out radiation, but they were blocking out me. Dinner became a minefield. My parents sensed the drift, even if they couldn't name the current. My mother would look at me across the table, her brow furrowed in that specific level 3 concern that precedes a family meeting. "You seem far away lately," she said one Tuesday, passing the potatoes. The clink of the spoon against the bowl sounded like a gavel. "Are you depressed? Is it school?" She was trying to diagnose a ghost. She was worrying about a son who had already vacated the premises. I wanted to scream, "I'm not depressed, I'm just in the wrong room." But the words stuck in my throat like dry bread. "I'm fine," I lied, the static filling my ears until their voices sounded like they were coming from underwater. "Just tired. The equilibrium couldn't hold. We got careless." Comfort breeds complacency, and we had started to feel safe in our little bubble. It happened on a Thursday. I was in the sanctuary, fully dressed. I was wearing a soft, oversized sweater dress that Chloe had donated to the cause. I was standing in the middle of the room, laughing at something she said, feeling light, feeling real. Then the doorknob turned. We had forgotten the lock. The sound was deafening. The metal latch disengaging was louder than a gunshot. My heart stopped. Time liquefied. Chloe moved faster than I thought possible. She shoved me, hard, into the narrow gap between her bed and the wall, throwing a heavy knitted quilt over me just as the door swung open. "Chloe?" It was Dad. His voice was tired, heavy with the workday. I lay frozen under the quilt, inhaling dust and the smell of old fabric softener. My heart was hammering against my ribs like a trapped bird, loud enough that I was sure he could hear it through the floorboards. "Don't come in!" Chloe shrieked, her voice pitching up into a perfect performance of teenage outrage. "I'm changing! God, knock!" The door paused. I could feel his presence in the doorway, a heavy, masculine energy that threatened to dissolve the sanctuary. "Sorry," he mumbled. "Just wanted to ask if you'd seen my charger." "No. Get out." The door clicked shut. I didn't move for a full minute. The adrenaline didn't fade. It turned into a cold, hard clarity. I wasn't terrified of being grounded. I wasn't scared of a lecture. I was terrified of being seen and then erased. I was terrified that if he had seen me, the look in his eyes would have killed the person I was becoming. I crawled out from under the quilt, shaking. Chloe was sitting on the bed, her face pale. She looked at me, then at the door, then back at me. The fun was gone. The experiment vibe had evaporated. "We can't keep doing this here," she whispered. "This room, it's a cage, isn't it? A nice one, but still a cage." She was right. I had outgrown the closet, even a metaphorical one made of quilts and locked doors. I couldn't live in the gaps between floorboards anymore. The static was waiting in the hallway, and I knew I couldn't go back to it. It wasn't a dare in the playground sense. It wasn't a challenge born of boredom or cruelty. It was an ultimatum, delivered with soft hands and terrifying logic. 2 days after the close call with Dad, Chloe sat on the floor of her room, sorting through her makeup bag like she was inventorying ammunition for a war we hadn't officially declared yet. "We're going to the movies," she said. It wasn't a question. It was a statement of fact, dropped into the silence like a stone into a pond. My stomach did a slow, sickening roll. "We can't. I can't." "Not here," she said, not looking up from the eyeliner she was sharpening. "The theater in Westbury. The late show. It's dark. Nobody knows us, nobody cares. It's 20 minutes away, and the parking lot is dim." The terror that washed over me was different from the panic of almost getting caught in the bedroom. That was the fear of punishment, of shouting, of disappointment. This was the fear of reality. In this room, under the amber lamp with the scarf thrown over it, I made sense. The lighting was forgiving. The mirror was a friend I had made peace with. But out there, the world was full of harsh angles and fluorescent streetlights, and people who had been trained since birth to spot the difference between a real girl and a boy in a wig. I felt the safety of the bedroom walls shrinking, turning from a sanctuary into a prison cell. If I never left, I would never be hurt. But I would also never be real. "I'll look like a thing," I whispered. The shame was hot and sudden, rising up my neck. "I'll look like a joke." Chloe stopped. She looked at me, her expression unreadable, stripped of her usual sisterly annoyance. "You won't. You're not a joke. You're just uncalibrated. We're going to calibrate you." The preparation that night felt less like a makeover and more like armoring up for a siege. There was no music playing this time, no giggling. The air was heavy with focus. Chloe worked on my face with the precision of a restoration artist working on a damaged fresco. She wasn't just applying pigment, she was restructuring the architecture of my face. Concealer to hide the shadow of a beard that I had shaved until my skin was raw and weeping. contour to soften the jawline that felt like a weapon I couldn't put down, eyeliner to draw attention away from the brow ridge and towards the fear in my eyes. I sat perfectly still, barely breathing, my hands gripping the edge of the vanity stool until my knuckles turned white. I was a soldier, getting painted for camouflage. "Don't look at the details," she murmured, blending a harsh line on my cheek until it vanished into shadow. "People don't see details. They see the whole picture. If you walk like you belong, they believe you belong. Confidence is the only thing that matters. If you hunch, you're hiding. If you stride, you're just a girl walking to a movie." The outfit was strategic. We abandoned the flowy skirts and experimental dresses that felt so good in private, but would scream for attention in public. This wasn't a fashion show. It was an infiltration mission. I pulled on a pair of her high-waisted jeans, skinny, stretchy, holding me in a way that felt like a hug, and a bulky, off-the-shoulder sweater. It was nondescript. It was safe. It hid the width of my shoulders while exposing the curve of a collarbone. It was the uniform of 1,000 girls I had walked past in the hallways, invisible and envious. When I looked in the mirror, I didn't see the glamorous stranger from before. I saw someone quieter. Someone who looked like she might just be going to the movies on a Friday night. It was terrifyingly mundane. And that mundanity was the most dangerous thing of all, because it gave me hope. "Okay," Chloe said, stepping back and wiping foundation from her thumb. She tossed me her keys. "You drive. It gives you something to do with your hands, so you don't fidget." We waited until the house settled. The sounds of the television downstairs died out. The heavy footsteps of my father moved to the bedroom, followed by the silence that meant sleep. We moved through the hallway like shadows, skipping the squeaky floorboard we both knew by heart. At the back door, my hand hovered over the knob. My fingers were trembling so badly I could see the vibration in the dim light of the microwave clock. This was the membrane. On this side, I was a brother, a son, a ghost in a boy's body. On the other side, I was undefined, vulnerable, exposed to the open air. "Just open it," Chloe whispered behind me, her breath warm against my ear. "It's just air. It can't hurt you." I gripped the cold metal. I turned it. The latch clicked, the sound of the vault opening. The first step off the porch didn't feel like walking. It felt like falling. The concrete of the driveway was solid beneath my borrowed boots, but internally, I was plummeting. The wind that hit us wasn't the same wind I had known for 16 years. Before, wind was just weather, something to brace against, something to ignore. Tonight, it was information. It cut through the loose weave of the off-the-shoulder sweater, touching skin that had never been exposed to the open air before. It felt sharp, electric, and dangerously intimate. It felt like the world was touching me, not the armor I usually wore. The walk to the car was a gauntlet. Our driveway was empty, the street was silent, but my brain populated the shadows with eyes. Every twitch of a neighbor's curtain was an indictment. Every rustle of leaves was a whisper. I kept my head down, letting the long, dark hair curtain my face, terrified that the streetlights would act like an interrogation lamp, revealing the sharp jawline or the Adam's apple I was trying desperately to swallow. We got into the car. The door slammed shut, sealing us in a familiar capsule of silence. But the drive to the theater felt like piloting a spaceship through hostile territory. Every pair of headlights that swept over us felt like a searchlight. I gripped the steering wheel until my knuckles ached, grateful for the darkness, terrified of the destination. The theater parking lot was the point of no return. It was bright. The sodium vapor lights hummed with a sickly orange glow that flattened everything. "Chin up," Chloe whispered as we got out. "Shoulders back. You're not sneaking around." You're just a girl going to a movie. If you act like you belong, you belong. I tried to mimic her stride, that loose, unbothered rhythm. But my legs felt like they were made of wood. The sound of my boots on the asphalt, click, 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 sounded like a siren. We walked past a group of teenagers smoking near the entrance. My heart hammered against my ribs like a trapped bird. I waited for the laughter. I waited for the slur. I waited for the world to stop and point at the imposter. But they didn't even look up. They were too busy with their own drama, their own smoke. We reached the ticket booth. This was the test. The glass partition, the amplified voice. I couldn't speak. I knew that if I opened my mouth, the baritone rumble would shatter the illusion instantly. The voice was the one thing we couldn't paint over. Chloe stepped up. 2 for the 940, please. The guy behind the glass was young, bored, his eyes glazed over with minimum wage apathy. He punched a button on his screen. Student IDs? Yeah, Chloe said, flashing hers. She nudged me. I froze. My ID had a boy's name. It had a boy's face. It was a badge of the lie. She left hers in the car, Chloe lied, her voice dripping with teenage annoyance. Come on, do we look like we're 30? The guy looked up. His eyes slid over Chloe. Then they slid to me. Time liquefied. This was it, the moment of discovery. I held my breath, waiting for the confusion, the furrowed brow, the "Sir?" I stared at the counter, counting the scratches in the metal. Whatever, he sighed. 2 students. He pushed the tickets through the slot. Theater 6, ladies. Ladies? The word hit me with the force of a physical blow, right in the center of my chest. It didn't hurt. It reorganized my molecular structure. It was a single throwaway syllable, spoken by a bored stranger who just wanted his shift to end. But it was the most important thing anyone had ever said to me. He didn't see a boy in a wig. He didn't see a freak. He saw a girl who forgot her ID. I walked away from the booth on legs that felt like jelly, clutching that ticket like it was a passport to a new planet. We sat in the back row. The darkness of the theater was different from the darkness of the bedroom. It was a public darkness. I was surrounded by strangers, breathing the same air, laughing at the same jokes. I existed in the public sphere. I wasn't hiding under a quilt. I was eating popcorn. I looked over at Chloe in the flickering light of the screen. She wasn't monitoring me anymore. She wasn't managing a crisis. She was just watching a movie with her sister. Her casual acceptance grounded me more than any pep talk could have. She had made the impossible mundane. When the credits rolled and the lights came up, the panic flared again, the fear of the harsh overheads. But it was duller now. We walked out. We walked to the car. The night air hit my face again, but this time I didn't shrink from it. I inhaled it. It tasted like oxygen. It tasted like a future I hadn't let myself believe in. But as I turned the key in the ignition, watching the theater lights recede in the rearview mirror, the euphoria began to curdle into a heavy, devastating realization. The drive home wasn't a victory lap. It was a funeral procession. I was driving back to the tomb. I had tasted what it was like to be real, and now I had to go back to being a ghost. The car ride ended, and we slipped back into the house like thieves returning stolen goods. But the only thing we were returning was me. The air in the hallway was stagnant, recycled, smelling of lemon polish and unspoken expectations. It felt thick, gelatinous, like I was wading through invisible syrup just to get up the stairs. When the door to Chloe's room clicked shut this time, it didn't feel like a sanctuary. It felt like a holding cell. It was the place where the prisoner was processed before being sent back to solitary confinement. I sat at the vanity, the seat still warm from the preparation hours earlier. The girl in the mirror looked tired, her eyeliner smudged slightly at the corners. But she was still there. She was still real. And I had to kill her. That was the deal. That was the price of admission for the safety of this house. I picked up the cotton pad. It felt light, innocuous, a small circle of white fluff. I poured the remover onto it, the smell of alcohol and cucumber rising up, a scent that will always smell like heartbreak to me now. The first wipe was the hardest. It dragged across my cheek, taking the contour, the foundation, the blush, the architecture of my joy, and leaving behind a smear of beige on the cotton. I looked at the pad. It looked like dirty laundry. I looked back at the mirror. A patch of raw red skin shone through the illusion. The boy was peeking out, demanding his turn. I scrubbed. I scrubbed harder than I needed to, driven by a sudden, violent need to get it over with, to rip the bandage off before I lost my nerve entirely. The wig went back on the styrofoam head, staring blindly at the wall. The sweater was folded. The jeans were replaced by the shapeless, abrasive cargo shorts that hung on my hips like a surrender flag. When I looked back at the glass, the transformation was complete. The stranger was back. The static returned, buzzing at the base of my skull, louder than ever because now I knew it wasn't necessary. I knew silence was possible. I knew what it felt like to just be. I didn't cry until I tried to say goodnight. I turned to Chloe, who was sitting on her bed, watching me with that same intense, analyzing gaze. I opened my mouth to say thanks, but the voice that came out was deep, cracking, foreign. It belonged to him. And the horror of that sound, the absolute, undeniable wrongness of it vibrating in my own chest, broke something fundamental. I collapsed onto the rug. It wasn't a graceful weeping. It was ugly. It was the heaving, gasping panic of a diver who has been dragged back underwater just as they filled their lungs. Chloe slid off the bed. She didn't say, "It's okay." She didn't say, "Don't cry." She knew it wasn't okay. She just sat on the floor with me, wrapping her arms around the shoulders that were suddenly too broad again, resting her chin on the head that was suddenly too shorn. "I can't," I choked out, the words wet and heavy. "I can't put him back on. He doesn't fit anymore. It hurts, Chloe. It actually hurts." "I know," she whispered into my hair, holding me tight enough to keep me from shattering. "I know." The sun that came through my blinds the next morning wasn't revelatory. It was just light. It hit the pile of laundry in the corner, the stack of textbooks, the dust motes dancing in the air. But the eyes watching it were different. I lay in bed for a long time, staring at the ceiling fan, tracing the blades as they spun. Usually, the morning was a time of assembly, gathering the pieces of the mask, gluing them tight, preparing the performance for the audience downstairs. But the glue was gone. I didn't feel hopeful, exactly. Hope implies a wish, a maybe. This felt more like geometry. A line had been drawn between 2 points, the person in the mirror last night and the person in the bed this morning. And I knew, with the cold calculation of a survivor, that I could only travel in one direction. To go back was to cease existing. I got up, I walked to the bathroom. I didn't avoid the mirror this time. I looked the stranger in the eye and I made a promise. It wasn't a grand, cinematic vow. There was no swelling music. It was just a quiet acknowledgement of facts. "You are temporary," I told the reflection. "I am evicting you. It might take a year, it might take 5, but your lease is up." I needed an anchor, something to hold on to in the riptide of the day. I went to Chloe's bathroom while she was in the shower, finding a bottle of clear nail polish on the counter. I painted a single coat on my left thumb. It was invisible to anyone else, just a slight sheen, a trick of the light. But when I pressed my thumb against my palm, I could feel the smooth, hardened texture. A secret, tactile reminder. A tiny shield against the beige. Breakfast was a study in surrealism. The kitchen smelled of burnt toast and coffee. Dad was reading the paper on his tablet. Mom was making a list. They looked so solid, so permanent in their understanding of who I was. They saw a son eating cereal. They didn't see the girl who had walked into a movie theater 12 hours ago and been called a lady. "You sleep okay?" Mom asked, not looking up from her list. "Yeah," I said. The voice was still deep, but I pitched it softer. I didn't force the rumble. I let it sit higher in my throat. "Fine." I caught Chloe's eye across the table. She was buttering toast, looking bored, but when our eyes met, she paused. She looked at my hand resting on the table, at the thumb that caught the light. She didn't smile. She just gave a microscopic nod, a validation, a confirmation that the night before hadn't been a dream. The fear was still there, heavy in my stomach like a stone. I knew the arguments that were coming. I knew the confusion, the anger, the potential loss that lay waiting in the future like landmines. But as I sat there, listening to the hum of the refrigerator and the click of the tablet, I realized the static was manageable. It was just noise, and noise can be tuned out. I finished my cereal, stood up, and walked out of the kitchen. I walked differently. I didn't hunch. I didn't apologize for the space I took up. I walked with the memory of a girl in a dark floral skirt, leading the way. Later that afternoon, I caught my reflection in a darkened shop window. I didn't flinch away this time. I just nodded at her. The fear is still there, heavy and real, but it is significantly quieter than the joy of finally being present. If you want to hear more about the journey of becoming, or if you are walking this path too, subscribe and share your story below. We can figure out the rest together.